Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us this evening. For many of you who I haven't met, my name's Liz Richardson and I'm Council's General Manager. Could I please commence this evening's meeting by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands that we're meeting on this evening, in particular the Darug people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal people here with us this evening. I certainly recognise that in the last 5 months have been a very difficult time, and that there has been a huge impact on the community and the way that you're forced to live your day-to-day lives. This meeting is really an opportunity for us to work together and develop the best solution for the community moving forward. And you'll start to see some of the challenges as you hear from us this evening, and we're really keen for the input of the community moving forward. I'd like to introduce the team with us tonight. You may or may not know Jeff Organ, who is Council's Director of Infrastructure. And with us here this evening is Richard Baby and Chris Armett from Jeff's team at Council, and our consultants PSM, who are from the engineering firm that Council engaged to provide us with expert independent advice on how best Council can restore the damaged sections of Greens Road. With the councillors we've got with us this evening, we have the Mayor, Patrick Connolly, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Mary Lyons Bucket. I think I saw Councillor Richards. I think that might be each. And we did receive apologies from Councillor Wheeler, who was unable to attend this evening. I could see we also have in attendance with us the member for Hawkesbury, Ms. Robin Preston. So thank you for your attendance, Robin. And we also have several other council staff in attendance this evening also. So I'm going to pass over to Jeff, who'll be performing the introductions of our consultants in a moment.
Just so we don't leave anyone out, we've also got Councillor Amanda Kotlash on the call as well.
Apologies, Councillor. I'm struggling to see more than 4 heads on a screen.
No worries.
And our objective this evening is to try to finish up at around 8 p.m. We've got about 40 minutes worth of presentations, and then a good 45 minutes or so for feedback and questions. Happy to extend that if we need to, though. As we're using Zoom, obviously this evening to conduct our meeting, we'd like to just sort of set up a few house rules really to make sure that we can keep the meeting flowing nice and smoothly. Please mute yourself while other presenters are speaking. We do have superpowers where we can mute you if need be, but would prefer not to have to use them. I ask that you hold all the questions until for the Q&A session at the end of our presentation this evening, as you may find that your question is answered during our presentations. I would also ask, really for my assistance as much as anything else, that if you're familiar with it, please use the online hand to indicate that you'd like to ask a question, and that way that will bring to my attention and we can run the session smoothly. And that we'd just encourage you to remain respectful in your tone and nature of any comments or questions. Confine them to the topic at hand, and I just want to make sure that everyone who wants to ask a question or has comments, that they have the opportunity to do so this evening. Please note that we're recording this evening's meeting, and a copy will be placed on our website for those that have been unable to attend this evening. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Mr. Organ, and he will begin our proceedings. So thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thanks, Liz. So just as I said, it's a fairly simple and straightforward agenda for tonight. Obviously a fair bit of information to get through, and as General Manager's just indicated, I'll give a bit of a brief introduction. We're going to hand over to PSM. We've got Gareth Swarbrick and Greg Visoni from that firm there, who've been doing the detailed work, and then we'll go through after their presentation, and we can go through the next steps that we see. And that'll be the Q&A session after that. So as I said, we know we're all here to a bit of an update into the background, and an update and a background into the investigation that we've been undertaking on the flood damage that occurred at Greens Road. It's certainly been a very challenging time following, or as part of the flooding and the flood rectification works right across the city. We do understand that the community in many areas has been severely affected, and certainly it's come on the back of fires for many areas as well. So we do have, may not seem at times, we are very empathetic and understanding of the situation that many people find themselves in. But it's been very extensive damage that's occurred to the Hawkesbury in particular. So as a result of those floods in March 2021, so we know the affected areas, particularly along Greens Road. There's two major sections that have got failures in them, and we'll get that presentation by PSM that will go through the particular issues there and the options available to undertake those works. We do have at the end of the presentation, as I said, basically run through what the various options are, and this is part of that consultation with the community we'd indicated we'd undertake, because it's not an easy fix, as you will see from the presentation that you're about to get. So we'll have some options there about how we do this, what the impacts are during construction, and the difficulties that we will continue to face as we try to restore this very difficult road. As I said, this is not an uncommon occurrence. If you go back through the Hawkesbury, there are a number of farm roads that have been constructed from the early 1800s, and this is one of those, where they were certainly built for the purpose of the day. They've certainly been affected by the movement of the major rivers that we have. We've certainly had roads that were formerly on sound solid ground well out into the McDonald River or the Colo River. And this is another one where, as I said, we were just even looking at some plans today where there was a remarking and a redefinition of the road. I'm presuming it's following the 1867 flood, where there must have been significant damage that occurred, and the road was shifted in 1873 pretty much to its current sort of location. So it is, we're battling the forces of nature everywhere, and even on the lowlands at Richmond and Windsor, there's been significant damage and movement of riverbanks that's affected property. We're going to fall into a little bit of jargon tonight, what we call, just to get everybody there. So Site 1 is the most southerly area, and that's the area where before Juniors Club, and that's the area where the 5-tonne load limit is. When we're referring to Site 2, that's the closed section to the north. So it's a bit easier, so we can refer to either Site 2 or Site 1 or south or north, but that's the terminology we're going to use during the evening. So at the moment, we've got that 5-tonne limit on the cracked section before you get to Juniors, and then the remaining section where there's more extensive cracking and failures is closed to traffic. So probably going to hand over to Gareth, I think, who's doing the presentation. So as we engage PSM, they're a highly reputable firm of geotechnical engineers that have done significant work for many years across New South Wales and Australasia, I guess. And I'll hand over to Gareth to start his presentation.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Liz. How's the audio there? Is that okay, people? Nodding heads, good to see. So yes, thanks very much, Jeff. So I've been asked to give an update of our involvement and what we've discovered so far along the journey. And like Jeff says, we're also very acutely aware of the time it's taken to get us where we are now. It's not where we'd hoped to be. And there are various reasons for that, which I can touch upon and we can discuss. And it's kind of, in a lot of ways, it's history catching up with us. Jeff mentioned about the age of the road and the state of it, and it's a road that has lasted for some period where you look at it now and think, I'm not quite sure how it did last this long, given what we know in terms of investigations and the history of it, etc. But I'll take you through it in a bit more detail and you can see what I'm talking about. So the road was constructed around the mid 1800s, for farmland access, and I think Jeff mentioned it was like farm roads is sort of one of the terminologies we're using for this. So it's a gravel road and it's partially cut into the hillside and partially supported on stacked sandstone boulders, and that's a traditional type of support measure that's been used in these areas in particular. And these areas that we're talking about, Site 1 and Site 2, happen to be very close to the river, so they're very susceptible to flood impacts and flood damage, and they also they're close to the river because of the type of terrain that they're sitting in, where they have a very steep high embankment that sits on the other side of them. So they're sort of very confined spaces where they sit. So from what we can tell, we don't have any design records for this road. We don't see it designed to any certain standards or to actually survive any type of flood events. So the flood event that we had in March caused an overtopping of the road, and we see that's a critical part of the reason why the road failed, is that normally the road has not overtopped before, but that overtopping throws a lot of water in, it inundates the soil that's there. The extra water inside the soil is something that the stacked stone boulders are not really used to dealing with, and that has caused the slumping that we've seen in those 2 locations. So it caused failure at 2 locations, and then it caused quite an extensive length of cracking. And I think when I first went out there, which was pretty much 1 or 2 days afterwards, and I got the call from Richard, I saw about 120 meters or so of cracking. And as I mentioned, these areas are close to the river, and they are on the outer parts of river bends, which we think is a factor. It's a factor, I guess, really, in that it's caused the topography that we see, where it's quite steep and the hillside is steep all the way down to the water, giving you not much room to maneuver. So we know that there's been damage like this as recently as 4 years ago. So this is a commonly occurring occurrence in relatively speaking. And we also know the flooding events that in March 2021, we went back and found them, looks like they've occurred about 19 times since the 1800s, early 1800s. That's 19 times that the road has been overtopped. And we think that overtopping, as I mentioned, is a sort of a key factor in where the road is normally able to sustain largely the flooding, but in this case, it has not been. And that overtopping is a key design event that we want to be able to say that we have designed our road for, that it can handle, because they can happen quite frequently. And anecdotally, I think it's happening more and more, but we don't have enough historical data really to prove that. So Jeff mentioned the 2 sites. So just to reorientate yourselves if you're not sure. So we've got a Site 1 down here, which, as Jeff's mentioned, is just before Juniors. That's the one with the 5-ton load limit. And then Site 2 is further up, which is currently closed. And as we're saying, these are located on bends, but importantly, you can kind of get an idea of how steep that terrain is just the other side of Site 2 and Site 1. So they're really in sort of nooks, if you like, tight spaces where there's not a lot of room to maneuver. So when I went first out there, there's actually around 80 meters of cracking. When we went back out there for a second inspection, that had grown to 260. When I say grown, it wasn't cracking that we'd missed, although there was probably some of that, but the majority of that was new cracking. So they instantly told us that this is a site that had not finished. It was still moving and there were still effects ongoing. The work we've done so far is to visually map the observable cracks. We have those in 3D in AutoCAD and GIS type programs. We've done drone surveys to provide high quality imagery and also assist with the cracking survey. So we use the drone footage to then go back and track the cracks and map them very accurately in 3D space so we can see where they are, what they look like, and also over time if they have progressed. We did hand augering and penetration testing to bedrock, and you can appreciate the load limit applies to us as well. So it's not like we could get machinery out there to actually do the sort of deep penetration testing that we wanted to, particularly in the short term. So a lot of that was done by hand when that was the only type of access we had. We then were able to get a fairly light truck mounted rig that we used to I think it's about 30 odd boreholes, and Greg can correct me if I haven't got that quite right. That's roughly speaking how many auger holes we drilled, just to try and get an idea of what the site looked like beneath the surface. We also did some test bits with an excavator, which gives us a greater perspective, if you like, because you can uncover more material with an excavator. And again, they're fairly easy to use. But again, we had to be careful about the size of the excavator that we could use. We also commissioned a bathymetric survey by a company out of Melbourne, as it was, that could profile the riverbed below the surface, and the riverbed, that should say, not bank, sorry. And so we used that in combination with our surface survey that the council had done as well, and we stitched that all together to try and get us the most complete picture that we could about what the geometry of the site looks like. So as our investigations progressed, the length of cracking has increased to 360 metres, and in fact, just yesterday there was another crack that was discovered, probably an existing crack, but it does emphasise the caution that we need to exercise in the fact that it's quite a substantial length of road. It's not easily apparent where all the cracks are, due to the fact that there's gravel, so that the gravel gets moved around over time. There's vegetation, there's other things that restrict your ability to get everything at once. We must be very close, we think, by now, but also, as I said, importantly, we want to make sure that things are not moving, progressing, because when we come to our final permanent solutions, we want to make sure that we capture all of that affected part of the road. So we've had the road collapse, which was prevented unsafe passage of vehicles at the time. We've now got that site one open, and we have had, as I've mentioned, we've seen this ongoing movement in other parts of the road adjacent to those sites. Particularly site 2, I think, is the longest impacted site at the moment, with the length of cracking that's there. But also site 1, there's extensive cracking north of the main collapse site. There's the steep slopes, as I mentioned, with substantial loose material over the road. And we've also found quite a substantial quantity of rock below the surface, and with varying thicknesses of fill below that. And I'll show you what that looks like in pictorial form, rather than just words. So this is a section taken out of, this is an actual real section taken from one of our stitched together profiles. So this, to give you an idea of scale, so there's a vehicle sitting there on the road surface. That's typically what the road looks like. There's fill that sits in beneath that car that's been put there over time, and it would have been in various campaigns. Sometimes the fill looks like it's been taken from up the hill slope. Sometimes the fill looks like it's imported from elsewhere. So there's a whole mixture of different types of fills. And then we have some natural soil that sits below that. And then we have what we believe to be as rock. And this is what we've encountered when we were doing our probing. You can see, importantly, up slope of the car, there's a very steep, long slope. And on that slope is loose soils, boulders, often much larger than you see there in comparison to the car. So we have and this type of slope is it's the type of slopes we get in Hawkesbury sandstone, which are continually moving over time. They are continually eroding, and the steepness is a representation of the natural erosional features that form this type of steep slope. We have some natural material at depth, and we believe we have rock. And on the other side, due to the location of the river on the bend, we see that we've got a very deep scour. This particular site is quite steepened. Most of it's not quite as steep as that, but still quite a significant drop off of 7 or 8 meters. That's very steep, and we understand it to be rock. We're not completely sure about that, but what we can tell thus far, it does appear to be a rock basis. And then somewhere down here, we have the riverbed sediments. If we zoom up on that a little bit more, just to sort of clarify some of the things we've been looking at. So here's the existing fill of varying types and consistency. In various locations, we might have some stacked stone where we're crossing an old creek bed or something else to try and level the road up, as they used to do in the past when they built this road. And as I said, we have this material that we call colluvium, which is this boulders and loose material, which is gradually sliding its way down the hill. Any attempt to dig into this means that you need to prop up that material to stop it moving, because it will then move into the void that you created. And we can see here that we've got a fairly steep drop off on the other side to deal with in terms of managing what's going on. So this is quite open to the elements. If the water level stays down here, then we're not going to see much impact. If it goes above this, but say not too high, it might cause some temporary wetting of here. But when it gets up to the sort of March 2021 level that we see here, we've completely saturated this fill. And then it becomes at its most vulnerable and weakest because of that water that's not normally there. It's normally, the water is normally diverted away from the fill in different various channels and drains, and the fill is prevented from wetting. So just trying to move this tab out of the way because I'm missing my, there we go. My headings, there we go. So the temporary remedial work. So this is what we've given to council to get the roads open again. They are temporary in that they will have certain restrictions associated with them because they're designed to open the road fairly quickly, but they're not designed to be there in the long term. So if they were there for several years, we would see it could be also prone to scour erosion by the next flood, perhaps some moving down of the material upstream of the upper slope. So the temporary measures are some cut in the toe of the slope here to widen the road slightly and allow traffic to come further away from this vulnerable area of this loose material, provide barriers to prevent people inadvertently driving on this loose material. And we're also going to remove the upper surface, which what it does is it takes away that loosened material that was affected by the flooding and will provide a more stable surface on which to locate traffic and importantly increase that load limit. And that's obviously an important factor here, not just the fact that we're trying to get lightweight vehicles through here, but also the heavier vehicles, the rubbish collection vehicles and things like that, which is obviously an important factor. So those things are all have been considered in this temporary design solution that we've provided to council. So the permanent solutions, what have we been looking at? This is what we see the requirements need to be. So as well as those obviously take those loads, which I haven't written here, but it's implicit on what in our design that we need to make sure that whatever we do can sustain the traffic that's normally there, and also the construction traffic. So when you want to do repair works as quickly and as cheaply as possible, you often want to use the biggest machinery. So that's a consideration as well. We may be designing this road to sustain the heaviest loads that it might be required to sustain. Could be construction loads, for example. But the other requirements that we have, so it's obviously got to survive these floods, and we see that as a key factor. So just going back and putting what's there now, as a group, we felt, and when I group, I'm talking about the people at council and ourselves and others, felt that it needed to have something that is going to sustain, be able to survive the type of flooding that we saw earlier in March. It needs to meet acceptable standards. I'm an engineer. I'm bound by the codes of the Engineering Australia. And so I need to put forward something that I feel it meets the engineering standards of the day. It's very tight space, so we need to think about how we can construct in that space. You can see the drop-off we saw into the riverbed. We could try and build off barges. That could be a way of doing it. That's obviously something else to think about in terms of cost, etc. We have to work with an existing road corridor, and you've already seen it's quite a narrow space that we're having to deal with. And we also, of course, trying to balance it up, constructing in a timely manner, hence looking at different types of machinery, different options, etc. So it's pretty easy to see meeting all of these things, that there's not going to be one optimal solution that's probably going to be the best based on all of these. And so part of this discussion we're having is to work out what the priorities are, what we can do in terms of getting this balance right, and what the council what their preferences are, And that's obviously a discussion that they're having with the residents as well. Some of the constraints we're dealing with. So we know that simple walls of stacked stone don't work. They've been relatively short-lived. We've got one clear example of one only lasting 4 years, for example. So we don't see this meets the above requirements. We have this steep overlying slope with substantial quantities of loose material that we have to deal with. So we need to constrain this if we widen the road, and if we widen it a lot, we need to constrain a very high amount of slope. If we widen it a little bit, less, and if we don't widen it at all or move out over the riverbed, say, then we don't have anything to constrain. So that's one parameter that we're trying to work with. We have the steep underlying slope with an ever-shifting riverbed geometry. So trying to build out over that would be a very tall structure from the base of the riverbed upwards that we'd have to consider, plus the impacts of the river and the normal wear and tear of the river scour and flood and flow velocities that we would have to deal with it from the day-to-day basis. And there's also quite a substantial quantity of rock that's below the pavement. So that makes things like installing concrete or sheet piles difficult and expensive to do. Let's go through some of those solutions that we've been looking at so far, so you get a bit of appreciation of how they stack up with the slope that we showed you previously. So here's our existing slope. Here is our roadway. And this is a solution that often comes to mind where you pile down and you create a wall, and then you can put your fill behind that wall. So right away, these piles would probably have to go deeper than this. These piles are what we call cantilevered. So the fill is pushing the pile outwards, which means it has to have a very high structural capacity. And there would be at piles, if they're kind of 200 millimeter diameter piles and you've got 5 per meter, we're talking about 600, 700 piles that have to be constructed into rock to create this type of solution. But it's definitely a solution that we're considering. It kind of meets all the requirements. One of the downsides to some extent is that we really want the water to be able to come out of that fill if it gets overtopped, because that would mean if that wasn't allowed to be happen, the piles would have to take the extra pressure of the water, and that would increase the cost, etc. So there are a few things about piles which aren't necessarily that conducive due to other factors at our site. Of course, we have rainfall coming down the slope as well that we have to deal with. This is another solution where you have piers, if you like, shorter piles, which aren't cantilevered, but they provide a floating bridge deck type solution. It's a bit like the solution down near Stanwell, near the ocean road that goes out over the ocean just near Stanwell Park there. And so that's an option. You can readily see that's probably quite an expensive option, but it is an option in terms of keeping cars safe and providing, taking away the sort of issues that we've been discussing. There's another option looking at where we have blocks, probably interlock blocks, so they're kind of stacked stone solution, but designed to be permeable, designed to be interlocked. They're at a fairly flatter batter angle, which means that they can tolerate more load due to flooding and things along those lines. That's another option. You have to design that also to be permeable to let the water through. There's also the option where you move entirely away from this area. So you then cut into the slope and you have a shotcrete face with bolts or pins. We often call them because often they're going into soil to some extent rather than rock. And that creates a space through which you can have your traffic and you keep well away from the problematic area. This is another solution that may not be that familiar to many of you, and it's kind of a different way of approaching the problem. So what we have is we do have a wall, which is typically created out of interlocking blocks, but the wall has connected to it reinforcing strips, and those strips are built up with the fill that's placed behind the wall. And those reinforcing strips actually hold the wall in place. So you're creating a reinforced earth, and that's the terminology used for this type of material. And that reinforced earth does a few things. It creates a fill which is a lot stronger and more robust than the fill would otherwise be. And it also has the ability to hold a more vertical wall. So this wall can be near vertical. Typically it's 1 and 8, but it gives you more space compared to, say, the block wall I showed earlier, which had to be flatter to create a more stable and safe supporting system. So this is quite an attractive system because of this dual effect of the fill. It's also a system that can be built in a range of different conditions. And it's something that we find quite attractive at the moment. It's quite possible that something like that solution might have alongside of it a cut associated with it that provides a little bit of extra space. That cut would not be perhaps as substantial as, say, a large cut that I showed you previously, which would be required if you are using a cut into the face to create the entire road space for your traffic. And that's just the same solution. I think we actually missed, there was a solution where we've only got the reinforced earth, apologies, and that comes out further rather than this combination. So this is really the combination between this cut and the reinforced earth, but you can imagine I could take that out a bit further if I wanted to avoid cutting into the slope in this particular location. So that's the last of my slides. That's the solutions that we've come up with thus far. You can probably tell by the way I've talked more to this particular solution that kind of favour this at the moment. It's got quite a few advantages associated with it, but we haven't set into stone, pardon the bun, the actual which solution we're going to go forward with. Is really fairly recently we presented these to council to consider.
Thanks, Gareth. As I said, the PSM have gone through fairly extensive, and there's still a bit more work to do, obviously, to start to refine those solutions. And as I said, tonight's probably about, if we get some feedback from the community as to any of the issues that might be associated with some of those options, we're happy to sort of take those on when we get into the latter part of the evening and take those on board. I guess one of the things that I've always taken away from Gareth's presentations and discussions is the fact that safety is really, and I use that term, and you'll see it in correspondence, it's paramount. This is no longer a farm track. It does have vehicles on it of varying types. It's got all sorts of, we've got school buses and all sorts of things, and we certainly know that's, the community access is really important. But one of the things I know as human beings we're really, really bad at, and that's assessing risk. We all think that something is not going to happen, and that's something that I suppose as engineers, we've been trained to understand that it's a failing, and you've actually got to deal with that at a real level, rather than saying it'll be right, that'll never happen to us. So again, if we're risk averse in some of these things, probably make no apology for that. But I've said to a few people, I have no desire to be in the coroner's court explaining why somebody's drowned in the river. Mm. I think the other thing I've taken from some of the work that PSM have done, and you can see that vertical slope that's still sitting there below water level. That's not what's obvious to most people. The other thing I think probably as Gareth I'd probably emphasise is that, again, but it is highly likely we're going to continue to get more movement and of the river route itself. Both of these sites are on the outer bend of the river. And just from from an obvious engineering sort of thing, what occurs is the water in a flood will flow much faster around that outside curve. It's got further to go than the inside. So that's typically why you get build-up of sediments on the inside of a river curve, and it's always eroding on the outer edge. It's those velocities. So let me just go back to where we were. Share the screen again. So the next steps, I guess, that we've got to look at is what the options are for remediation. As I said, we've gone through, obviously, we've got what we're terming interim or temporary works, and we've got to look at how we might implement those so there's minimum impact. So what Gareth has gone through there in those interim works is essentially cutting down the depth of the road temporarily and cutting into the embankment. We do have some constraints on that embankment. So we're not too far from National Park. Property ownership there, I said, it's not an easy thing to go and build a road in a national park for very good reasons. There's very, very strict protections on national parks, so we can't go too far in there to do that, even if the engineering wasn't problematic. So we think that if we were to do temporary remediation works at both of those sites, they'd probably take around 3 to 4 weeks. What we don't know, and whilst Gareth's done lots and lots of drill holes and test holes and so on there, what we've found over time is you can have some anomalies between any of those points. So when we're doing those works, we don't know exactly what we're going to find when you start digging, particularly in what has been built up over many years. We're likely to find possibly some aberrations within that profile. So again, we can't be certain how long that will take. And one of the other things, I guess, we talked about, the loading on that road. One of the things we don't want to do as a result of any construction and vibration is to make things worse. We're trying to retain the material that's there so that we can actually get the road back operational as quickly as possible. So we think that both those works would take around 3 to 4 weeks each. That at site 1, that would enable us to increase the load limit that's there at the moment of 5 tonne through to 10 tonne. That's the constraint that's on that site at the moment. It would mean, however, that we'll be at site 1, we'll also have to close that road for around that period. It'd be very, very difficult or impossible to allow access during construction. At site 2, the proposal that's been put forward would allow us to, as you saw the vehicle on that cross-section, impose a 3 tonne load limit on that and open it, but only during daylight hours. And again, being the risk averse is that we need to continue to monitor that. That's why the daylight hour proposal is there only, because we need to be able to check it quite frequently as to whether there's any movement if vehicles are going across it. We'd be doing that under traffic control and we'd close that road at night time. There'd also probably be the restriction on closing that if we've got weather like we had on Tuesday again. As soon as that material gets saturated, it's again the engineering side of it. You're putting another cubic metre of water in, and waterways, we all know how heavy it is. So another tonne per cubic metre of water in that embankment loads up that quite significantly. And again, we'd have constraints during the works at site 2 as well. So again, probably not so much of an issue other than it's still, the construction period would still need to remain closed. But no difference from the current situation that's causing some of the grief. As Gareth indicated, we're going through and doing that, getting that design for both site 1 and site 2. And it's probably given a strong preference to an option within those options that we do have. And a number of probably take 3 to 4 months at each site potentially to construct those works, and that's subject to no further cracking and the extent of works being identified fully at the moment. And again, during construction, both of those sites would need to be closed to traffic. Now, obviously, we could do them all together, but that would make access for all residents extremely difficult. It would also make the construction probably a little bit longer because we wouldn't have access for our own purposes to get fuel, machinery and plant in there. So the key to that is obviously that that sequencing is going to be the key to minimise further disruption. And we had some phone calls from people saying, we're not taking those things into account. We certainly are. With option 1, what we're proposing in that is that we'd carry out temporary remediation works at Site 2, the northern end, and then follow that with the permanent works before we touched Site 1. That would mean that we wouldn't actually need to do any temporary works at Site 1, but it would mean that the 5-tonne limit would need to remain there. So that's that option. So just simply undertaking, we talked in jargon the other way, we did temporary at 2, the permanent at 2, and then undertake the permanent works at Site 1. Second option would be to stagger those. And again, we'd start at Site 2, do the temporary remediation works, remembering that they are weight limit, load limited, and daylight hours only, and then undertake the Site 1 temporary works after that. Problem though is with that arrangement is that means that to get out, you would have no access during night for anywhere north of Site 1 at night time or in adverse weather conditions, and they would be limited to 3 tonne. So that's another major impact that would need to occur. And then we would come back, do Site 2, the temporary permanent works, and then the permanent works at Site 1. Again, both those sites would be out during that period for up to 3 to 4 months. So, it's fairly clear in my mind, I guess, that option 1 probably gives the better offers a limited disruption, but means that you're still going to have 5-tonne limit at Site 1 in that option. So the real question, as we've just gone through, option 2 has the negatives of denying access at night time to the juniors area. So the trade-off, I guess, if we put it into blunt terms, is that you leave the 5-tonne limit as it is at the area south of juniors, and leave that until the permanent works. It's just too disruptive to go in and carry out that interim works. That gives probably the best access for more continuing access. It's preferred. Again, I would stress that the timeframes and so on that we've been talking about there are all subject to weather conditions and those site constraints that we might find. We would be looking, subject to finalising our construction plan, and that's we're talking with PSM about the plant and equipment required and able to go in there to try and get things done quickly. We would be trying to get that commencing next week at Site 2. As I said, there'll be no further disruption to the community at that point other than the undertaking the works. And we would be looking at probably 3 to 4 weeks of work there to undertake those. But again, subject to the conditions that are there. What we would like to do, and tonight's probably the first part of that, is undertake that further community engagement, both on the final design solutions and kind of take a straw poll, I guess, on the preferred option of not undertaking any further works at Site 1 until we've got full access available back at Site 2. And that's me talked out for a little bit. So probably just turn back over to Liz if you want to.
I'll take that over. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks, Gareth. Appreciate your presentations and your advice. So once again, I'll open it up to questions and comments, feedback, particularly in relation to those 2 matters, one being the final design solutions and also preferences around the sequencing of works is really important feedback for us. So I'll open it up. I can see the Deputy Mayor has raised her little yellow hand, so I'll start with you, Mary.
Thank you, Liz, and I don't want to take up the time of the residents. I just had a question that maybe could be explained. On the cross-section that you had where it showed where the loose material was up above, there was the underneath was rock with a question mark. I think you said you don't know what that is. I don't know what else is it if it's not rock. Sorry, that might be an ignorant question, but whatever it is, does it have an impact on what sort of solution you can eventually have if it's not what you anticipate?
Potentially,
Gareth?
it's potentially, but we're pretty certain it's rock. It's just, you know, we haven't drilled in there specifically, so it could be very, very rarely you could have some weak layer within that you could classify not as rock, but from everything we know about the geology and the general ecology of that area, it would be rock.
And just one other thing quickly, when you constrain the loose material, would that be something like how going up on Springwood Road up through Hawkesbury Heights, there's that like caged in sort of thing up there? Is that what you would, that sort of thing? Is that what you mean by keeping the loose material constrained?
Was that the last solution with the strips, the reinforcing strips?
It was on the upper of the road of how would you constrain that material that may come down.
What you would see was it would be a shotcrete facing. So if that's what you mean, I'm not sure it's the same thing.
I could probably chime in there, Gareth, that basically on Springwood Road, there's a series of gabions, there's rock bolting, there's a whole series of techniques up there. But I think what the Deputy Mayor is referring to is basically some gabions at the toe of those cut batters in the rock. Again, that site there, they also have meshing and so on for rock walls as well. So it's still prone to a whole series of other hazards at that location.
Yeah, we
probably
that solution we also discussed. We want to make sure it doesn't stick out like an eyesore as well. So we've had those discussions as well about what we would do with solutions like that to make sure that they don't stand out so obviously, and they can be made to blend in reasonably well. And the sort of solution we have has kind of got that in mind. It gives you more options to actually blend that in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. Further questions or comments? Keen for your feedback.
I'm not sure how do we put our hands up for that?
Well, good question. How about, I think it's in the reactions, isn't it? Yep. So if you go to the reactions with a little smiley face, there's a raise hand function. But if that's you, Damien, why don't you ask the question right now?
Right. Sorry. I mean, look, Gareth we're in the building game. My brother lives down here as well, and a fair few of us are. But I mean, at the moment, we've got a DA in which we kind of put some. We're right in the middle between the two areas there, and we've sold our house and we're renting a house on Wilbur Ridge Road at the moment, and we're ready to start our building back in March, and we're not able to obviously get there with any kind of limit at all. Yeah, basically for us, access is a big issue, and 10 tonnes obviously not going to cut it to get a concrete truck through there. You know, we're paying significant rent here at the moment, and 12 months will see us at about 40 grand in delays, and predominantly at the moment having a construction business ourselves, there's no better time for us to start building, so we're kind of delayed with that as well. They put the two options up there, and I'll just kind of, maybe I'm wrong and I didn't have a good thing about this, so I was just listening to it then, but why can't we increase the load limit on site 1, then remediate completely site 2, and then come back and then remediate site 1? That wasn't an option at all. And Gareth, with the piering, I kind of look at it as a piering and beaming kind of structure. Why can't we support the back end of the road, and you had your double piering option there? Why can't we put one set of piers through there to structurally support the road where the issue is on site 1 at the moment? Cut some of the bank out, reinforce the bank, and then up the limit a bit, so that 1, you guys can get heavier equipment through, and 2, we can actually start getting some concrete trucks through. And I mean, we need a 30-tonne limit to be able to get there to start building. And without that, Kim and I are behind the 8 ball now. With 1, we're losing work at the moment just because we run a hire business as well, and two, it's cost, by the time we get started, with $40,000 behind in rent just for a year's delay in construction. And we're not prepared to put our CC through at the moment because we're right on the verge of doing it. But if we pay the insurance policy on the CC at the moment, then we're 6 months or 12 months. We pay $5,000 insurance for the public liability and the construction insurance because we're going to do it as an owner builder. Even though we're in construction, we're going to do it as an owner builder. We're behind the 8 ball straight away. We lose 12 months worth of insurance because we can't get access to the site. And we've got no defining time to when it's exactly going to be finished.
Perhaps I can answer part of that question in terms of why we didn't look at doing site 1 first and getting that done. The issue there is that if you haven't got site 2 open in some form, then you can't actually get any, there is no access into and out of the area between the 2 closures. So it might affect, I can understand it certainly gives you the potential benefit to get in there and construct, but it would mean that anybody just between the 2 sites basically has no way out of them, probably by foot.
That makes sense,
It is an option, but we didn't put it up there for that reason. In terms of increasing the load limit, it's probably one for Gareth. I said we've tossed around, I guess, the issue of what will be the safe load limit. Some of that stuff will be obviously be able to be determined when we start excavating what we find actually in that material and how it behaves under compaction. But I'll let Gareth probably answer that.
So look, we'll take that on board in terms of the load limit. We've had discussions kind of around that already in terms of construction loads and things like that, which I think, anyway, we'll be having more discussions on that. But you mentioned about the idea of having the piers, the inner piers and having something else. And look, that's kind of the same thing what we're talking about. We need to have some foundation footing piers to level up the road, that's all. So the way we've drawn it, it's fairly schematic, but it may be quite a low type support structure. But we see that as kind of the same solution really that you're suggesting. But if it helps, we can include that as a specific type solution. But it's essentially, we're talking about a bridge type structure, which is the same thing.
I guess just then, where do we stand then? I mean, like I said, I'm not asking for remediation of costs or anything like that to a degree, but we're in a bit of a shitty place, like at the moment with that, and we're not constructing, and so something obviously that's not feasible to anyone, and everyone's in the same kind of boat down past that way. Rochelle's in it, and the caravan parks can't operate, and South Sydney Juniors can't operate as well. But I guess it's been 5 to 6 months now already, and I guess there's a bit of urgency on it that really needs to be addressed. And I understand the Hawkesbury's copped a massive whack, like it really has. Like it's in general, there's a lot to have taken into account, and we are out here as well. But I think just if we can, you really just start moving and pushing forward from here for everybody that's down here, it'll be a massive benefit.
Thank you, Damien. I certainly appreciate those comments, and that's why we're here tonight, to sort of hear some of those challenges that you're facing, and really to get the sentiment of the community about what our next steps are. Alison Wheeler, you had your hand up next.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
We've got you perfectly.
Perfect. It's not always a great connection, which is another problem that we don't have to solve tonight. But look, there's a couple of things I just wanted to raise. One was the fact that there's been a history of problems and cracks on this road for quite some time. So it's fantastic that all you guys have got together and looking to solve it. I think, overdue, but it's not a new problem exactly. It's just it's exploded, and now people are super impacted. I saw no, and I'm not an engineer, I should call it out, Gareth. I saw no channeling of the water that comes from the runoff of the hill. I'm assuming you guys are going to either pipe that, because we've had enormous channels dig into the road when the water flows across at various points. Is that something that you've considered in your design?
Yes, Alison, that's something that comes with all those designs. All those designs are amenable to that. There are existing channels already and culverts and things like that need to be looked at, whether they need to be increased or added to, or so there's a drainage system in place already.
It's not working. I think that's what I'm trying to highlight, is that it overflows on a regular basis and causes problems which council then has to repair. So I just wanted to highlight that. I wanted to understand that I saw nothing on traffic management. So during construction, by the way, if you've recognised I have a small accent, it's because I'm from New Zealand. So we're very used to hills, rivers and water. What I didn't see was any sort of traffic management to allow access for people during construction. You said it wasn't possible. You know, I would argue that perhaps there is a way to make that possible, so at least people have access. Is that out of the question?
No, I think we're trying to make that as access as open as we can, within the constraints of whatever the construction approach is taken that gets the road built quickly as well. So obviously trying to balance up providing access, but also giving as much access to construction so you can build it quickly. And that's obviously something we have to work through.
Yeah, so clearly that's a debate. And then the last thing is that 3 to 4 weeks on each site for temporary remedial action takes us, and I'm presuming that's consecutive, that takes into October, correct?
Yes.
So you're right at the beginning of the fire season.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have 2 roads that can't take a fire truck. Is that sort of what I'm asking? 2 components that can't take a fire truck?
Okay, I guess so. I don't know what the loads of fire truck are, but whether you've got bush vehicles that on lighter loaded, RFS trucks, I'm not sure.
So that would be a fear, I would think. And
Jeff, do you want to provide a bit of comment on that, Jeff?
Yeah, so basically, obviously, we've been in discussions with the Rural Fire Service, and normally this area is serviced by the Lower Portland Brigade, but for the time being, and it's not the most. There are some delays, but coming from, they would be servicing that area to the north of the closures from the McDonald Valley, Webbs Creek area, but that's something they're certainly aware of. It's not the best solution, but it's the only solution that's probably available there at the moment.
So just to understand you, Jeff, you're saying that the southern part will be serviced by the Lower Portland Rural Fire Service, and the northern part will be serviced by McDonald's Creek.
Yep, McDonald's Valley, whichever.
Top of the head. Okay, well, that's at least some coverage, I guess. But you know,
I would just make the point that coming from the north is more time consuming for the brigades from the north, though.
Exactly. So it's high risk, and you know that's obviously part of your safety plan that you put together. So look, first of all, I think this is the first time I've sat where council has brought a meeting to us, so that's brilliant. And we're sitting in an environment where everybody gets to have a say. So I hope more people speak up, because what I've heard generally is there's a huge amount of pain in this community. It's a very close community and they feel very cut off. And it's taken 5 months to have this conversation, which is fantastic that we're here now. So speed is of the essence, but I think it's also trying to balance speed and safety and access. Those are the 3 components.
That is our vexed problem, Alison. Thank you.
Sorry to point that out. I'm sure it's stating the bleeping obvious. Sorry about that.
Rowan Smith, you're next.
Okay, can you hear me there?
Yeah, we've got you. Thank you.
Okay. We have a lot of trouble with our internet, so the pictures all dropped out. So anyway, we're sitting in the caravan listening to you. Now, we've got quite a few issues that we wish to bring up. One, if we go with the option of closing 1 and only have daylight hours to come in and out, my wife works shift work at the hospital and she just won't be able to come home. So that's just not an option for us. So that's one thing. Second thing is, we've been asking right from day one, even when Robin came down, right through continually, is we asked for the engineers to have a look at cutting back section 1 to increase the load limit, and we're getting no response, no feedback. If we can do it, why we can't do it as a temporary measure to be able to open it up so we can get trucks in. all of us down here need concrete. We've had huge washaways. We're trying to fix things. People are trying to build, and we're getting no feedback on that. So it's another point. Can anybody answer that one?
So to get the question right, just cutting back into the rock embankment.
Yes, on one.
So Gareth, can you sort of go back through the difficulties of that?
Yeah, sure. So if you remember that, I can bring it up again if that helps. Is that a good idea?
No, it doesn't help me because I can't.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Apologies. So if what we have is a continuous steep slope at site 1 and site 2, and that slope has got boulders and loose material sitting above it. So any cutting into that causes that material to start moving again. It's all been moving over time, and we mobilize that by doing that. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not as easy as just cutting into that slope to create that space, because we'd have to open up a whole bunch of other support issues that we have to design around. So we're back to doing a design. The size of the slope we're talking means that the design requirements are quite intensive. So we're really talking about a permanent design, which is where we are now. So we come up with a solution that we thought could be implemented much more quickly than the permanent, which is what we currently have.
No, what I'm stating, Gareth, is you brought in an excavator at the start. You cut it back with a small excavator without just looking at it, and you gave access to get through. Now, is there any possibility you can go back a couple more feet to open up the load limit? I know the surface there, and everybody knows it. If it went back another half a metre, is that possible? And will it open it up to a larger load limit?
Well, I don't think it was when we looked at that. That wasn't an easy option to do. Yes, I know we did on site go and say we can trim these little corners, and they were like, if you like, corners, but we're talking now, when we go that extra metre or so, we're talking about a much more continuous strip through that face that we have to then look at very carefully to see how we support that and see what all the features are that might be mobilised as a consequence of that. So we have looked at that as part of the temporary solution. We can look at that again, but we did consider that already.
Okay, now there was another option that the locals came up with, that there was a fire trail that goes up behind the hill and comes out. Now, some of that is private property, we have found out, but is there an option that we could do that so that at least the locals can get in and out if those roads are being repaired? I'm
happy to have a look at what that layout is and the ownership, if that's the case. As said, depending on whether it's going into national park or private property, obviously we need to deal with those. But if that's something that can assist us in reducing timeframes and is permissible, we can certainly have a look at that, as well as the safety of it as well. In terms of cutting back, we're also happy to look at that. As said, putting words in Gareth's mouth, but even just cutting back though a metre may still mean that we're loading up the slip circle of the road as well with at least one half of the wheelbase of the vehicle. So again, just cutting back slightly might get us across, but may still cause further damage to the existing formation. So we need to be very careful of that.
Look, it may be, but you guys should have already looked at that for geotech, and that information should be available. It was asked to be looked at right from the start, so I don't understand why you haven't put that in your survey. So we as residents would like to know that, because Rob and Preston, the mayor, everybody was down here, was looking at that as the first option. So why that hasn't been tabled, I don't know. So we'd like some answers on that. I have another question. I don't want to take up everybody's questions, but we've had Telstra along the road over the last week looking at moving the poles. And I did mention this to council today, that they are telling us, Telstra are telling the residents that you guys wish to move the poles, and they're saying it's not a high priority and it will be down the track a bit, which is going to delay things. Has anybody looked at that, and is there feedback on that?
So the advice that we've had from Telstra is they've given us the quotations. We've commissioned that. They've not indicated to us that there's any significant delay. I understand there are other Telstra works further along Greens Road. So the division in Telstra that we're talking to, in terms of the works that we've got, we've not been given any indication that there would be delays there. We're also talking with them and coming up with some various options for how the cable may be temporarily supported during the construction phase. So we haven't had any of that advice. As I said, we are aware that there are other works. I mean, there's sections where the Telstra cable is actually lying on the ground along Greens Road and in the bushland. So it may be those are the works that they're referring to, but not entirely sure if that's the case. But the advice that we've got is that we haven't got any significant delays with that. Obviously, one of the things we're trying to do as well is if we don't need to do that in our initial construction phase, if we can get away with not moving them, then that's an even bigger bonus to us.
Okay. Also, there's been no mention about the ferry service, which Darren Oswell has been asked to price, and he has done. But I know for a fact that he hasn't been contacted in the last few weeks in regard to it. And that is another option for us to be able to get home. And he is working with the locals to be able to offer the service out of ours as well to get us home. So there's some other options that don't seem to have been completed by council at this point. And we need to know that information to be able to plan our lives.
So in terms of the water-based access, I said we've asked Osmotherleys to provide us with that pricing. We've got indicative pricing from them. I won't go in. It's probably commercial at this stage in terms of what it is. I won't say that it's something that's cheap. But one of the issues is that, and that the dollars will be a potential issue. It's not something that is normally not covered by the disaster funding arrangements, given that there is alternate access. It doesn't fit neatly within the norm.
On you saying there is an alternative, what happens when you guys are doing the roadworks either end? How do we get in and out? We can't. That's the problem.
Yep. So that's it. It doesn't fit. We've made inquiry. We had initial inquiry some time back with Resilience as to whether this would be an eligible thing. We've still pursued the issue. We actually have a meeting with Resilience New South Wales tomorrow. And that's something that we're intending to raise with them as to, now that we have those costs, as to whether that would be something that will fit within the natural disaster funding arrangements that have some fairly strict guidelines and rules around it. They're a state-federal arrangement. So whether that's something that, now that we know those costs, it's obviously one of the issues that still needs to be resolved is, how, if it were to be implemented, where the pickup point is to give access to all of the community that's north of the closures. So again, we don't have any public lands there, so that's something that we would need to pursue.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think with what Rowan's saying there is that, I mean, it is a small community between that area there, and I think that most people will be obliging to do whatever they could to make that work. And if that sped up the works, then I think everyone would be. I mean, if you guys opened up to us, there's 1,000 solutions there that haven't even been considered because nobody's even asked for them. And we're willing to work with anybody else to do that to speed up the process. And the cost of what it's costing down there to keep that traffic control there would far outweigh what it would cost for the smugglers to freight people back and forth. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, but as I said, that's something to exercise our mind. The traffic control is expensive, and it's probably going to be a both rather than a one or the other. In terms of the access, I'm not saying that there wouldn't be goodwill within the community there, but that's something we need to actually resolve. As I said, there are risks and hazards again. I'm not putting that up as a fatal barrier to anything, but we'd need to have formal if somebody is using their particular boat ramp or jetty as a public passenger area, they need to be adequately protected from any incident that might occur. So that's just something we need to work through, and how that service might be operated between the residents. So happy to understand, if there's anybody who's got something there when we go through and understand whether it can be something that can be funded, then we'd be happy to talk with anybody or a group of people how it might work up there.
Yeah, look, I appreciate that you guys are actually speaking to us now, because it's a hell of a lot easier to come up with solutions when we all get together rather than just all one way. So, look, I'll let someone else take over some of the questions.
Just on closing the road, like if they close the road, what am I meant to do? My car?
Sorry, I'm not sure who's talking there, but thanks, Rowan. Appreciate your input. Rochelle, you were next.
Yeah, hi guys. First of all, I really like to thank everyone for coordinating a community meeting. It's long overdue. We're 5 months in. I understand there's challenges with COVID, etc. So, the feedback here is really what going forward needs to happen, as you guys represent us as a council. Whatever decisions go on from here have to be made by the residents. Our lives are revolving around this road. Just thinking where to start here, so many questions. I'm thankful for the PFSM report, because it's actually provided us with the free options of what we are going to go and move forward with as residents. I'm sure that all the residents that are part of this meeting would also like to know, which is the preferred preference they want to go ahead with. Why it's taken 5 months now to present us with a design, and why we don't have a decision. So we obviously can't get a timeline on our own lives and our own businesses and our own family operations, because we haven't decided on a way to rebuild the road. We haven't decided on it, which is quite surprising at 5 months on after a flood. So with respect, it's great that we're at that stage. Going on to the traffic controllers, with any closures on the road, it has to operate 24 hours. We have a shift nurse, as already spoken. We have trade workers. We have trade workers coming through from the McDonald Valley, from Leetsvale, from Cliftonville. It's not just the 45 people on this meeting here. It's hundreds of people this affects. You cannot say nighttime hours. You just cannot. And you can't block people in from their jobs. You can't have people moving on a bushfire trail at 1 a.m. in the morning to go to their shift in a hospital. It's not an option. My business is closed because I can't travel at 2 o'clock in the morning to get product. I can't have product delivered. So we have no livelihood. So I'm exactly the same position as Damien. It's costing us thousands in a build, and we have no promises on a timeline. In every construction job in New South Wales, there is a construction timeline. There is a delivery. To be here at 5 months without a delivery promise is unacceptable. We have our families travelling on that fire trail. I've brought to the attention many times the unsafety. So to say that safety is paramount, and you're speaking about the road reconstruction, I respect that, but safety is obviously not paramount in this plan. We have lots of residents in between the site section 1 and the site section 2 who will be blocked in with flood and fire. H1 vehicles cannot fit down the northern end either. I have also spoken to the fire brigade, and only their trucks can fit down, not the H1 services. To even have a response from the McDonald Valley will not allow us to have fire trucks down the bends. They simply do not come down. We cannot get water haulage down. Now that we have found a couple of companies, yes, it's extremely expensive, but it's also timely. In a fire evacuation, where are we going to go? Where are these people going? You have to have access at both ends. You have to have a temporary pass. It's unacceptable either way not to. To have traffic controllers on nighttime only, you're still going to get traffic travelling through that's going to pass on the road on the damages. They're moving the barricades already. They're finding ways through. You have to have controllers 24 hours. To travel on the bushfire trail and to ask any more citizens to travel on that bushfire trail is unacceptable. Yes, you're grading it. Fantastic. Yes, it's actually a state park. There is many blind corners. It is not a road. It is a bushfire trail. Even if it's at its best condition right now, it is still a bushfire trail. We have had several accidents already in the 5 months on the bushfire trail. We've had collisions. There is no indemnity for our residents on that road. I had 2 in one day this week, and I'm not happy about it. It needs to be widened. It needs speed signs. It needs anything a road would have on it. Resilience New South Wales. So we've spoken to Resilience New South Wales. Resilience New South Wales said the funding is readily available through state, as did Jeff Organ in our May meeting, May 7th this year. State funding requests from the council. What is happening? Has it been processed? Why haven't we had? So to talk about feasibility for a water access, why? Where is it? Feasibility is not a question at this stage. Where is the disaster relief for the citizens of Greens Road? Whatever the quotes are, the quotes that you get in for the water service, they should be applied. We are in a flood and fire zone. These residents need the access. As stated from early April, we also do have offered those solutions, cutting in for temporary access, temporary movement, water boat. Nothing has come of it. We also, from April, presented that 8 of our residents share a title, boat ramp and strip of land for the water access for the boat. This is in the northern exposure. So this is nearly all of the residents in the locked off area between the bend and the damage share a title and a boat ramp where the boat can fix up. We have given this information. We have provided it. And we know New South Wales, Resilience New South Wales makes the pontoons in Riverston and provides them. Pontoons are not an issue. We also know that Resilience New South Wales can provide a fire brigade pontoon between the damaged sites to transport people. Where is the request for this support? Why hasn't it been done? And why are we sitting here still talking about it? We deserve the answers. This is our lives. We are heavily impacted financially. We're getting, and I am thankful to council for offering support services to my youth who are heavily suffering anxiety. So if anyone wants to jump in with any one of those answers, that would be greatly appreciated. We are sitting here with no answers, no moving forward. We have some great structural engineering information. Now we need decisions and action. Where is the action? So where are we moving forward? We've been presented with a very detailed report. Where are we going with it?
So if I can probably just chime in there, I guess, in terms of what we're intending to get out tonight is obviously outline the interim works, and I take on board your comments there that even at site 2, the interim works at the moment, the advice we're getting is that we do need to limit that to having daylight hours in those interim works. So I guess my view is, and it's kind of the no-brainer, I suppose, is to say, look, we really need to just carry out the interim works at site 1, at site 2, carry out permanent works there, whatever that will be determined, and Gareth and his team are working on those options. Obviously, they come with some costs, so they're well advanced. They're not, we've just gone through tonight showing all of the different types of things that could be done there. But as Gareth indicated, there's a strong preference for a hybrid reinforced earth arrangement as the most cost-effective and constructible and timely solution that we could probably put into that site. So again, yeah, I think that's the direction that we're going to be heading in and getting that done. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll try and finalise those arrangements or that design. In terms of the funding, as we discussed previously, and I've made my point in saying that the funding is available through the disaster funding arrangements for works. That is how everything is being paid for at the moment. In terms of that, the funds for the permanent restoration of works is subject then to, we do the design, we make the application. I don't believe there's an issue with that, but it needs to be signed off, and we put that proposal to through Resilience New South Wales or through Transport for New South Wales as the agency that administers that side of it. And we've had those discussions with them, so they're aware of the nature and extent of the works. So it's not an issue that the funding for those restoration works wouldn't be available. My point with the water-based access is that's something that doesn't easily and normally fit within those arrangements. But so I'm happy to have that discussion again with Resilience tomorrow, with the new director that's taken over this area, and understand what that, whether there's a different view. I'm happy to take all of the issues and the difficulties of being confronted by the community, as well as the issues during construction, because that's a different, what we now understand how we're going to rebuild it and what the impacts are. So happy to put that case forward to try and get that. And as I said, we're happy to work with Darren Osmotherly, and if there's a common landing area that overcomes those difficulties, it would be that, as I said, whilst there might be eight properties that access that, as you've indicated, there's a number of other residents up there, and there'd need to be some arrangement to provide equitable access if that was the way we went.
Just on that, it is a strip of land. You can park on it. No one lives on it. It's a strip of accessible land. It's all been approved by the owners, as has Site 1. The owner of that private property has also approved to cut in and use the trail. The Site 2 damage is Crown land, which can be cut into. It only needs for you guys to work on that. It's not a private property. For us to know that early on in the piece and to be at this point.
So just on Site 2, that's National Park. So again, there are some particular constraints on that, and also, as I said, our maintenance on the existing fire trail route. Again, that is through National Park land, so we've got to be very conscious of the approvals required for that. It's just one of the issues. I'm not saying it's fatal to the thing, but it's something that we need to work through. In terms
of what safety aspects are we going to put in on that road? What safety aspects are we going to put on that road so there's no more accidents?
So again, we'll continue to maintain that to the standard that we can. The standard, as said, it's like any of our gravelled roads. And when they're great when we've immediately done the work, but they do deteriorate until you get to a point where you need to do further work on them. That is the nature of an unsealed road, unfortunately. It's not something that's viable to go and construct through there. And again, as I said, construction on a national park on a fire trail is probably something that's going to be literally months, if not years, to gain an approval for that. As I said, we've had other issues where we want. Pardon?
There's no signage either along that road. Sorry to interrupt, Jeff. I didn't mean to interrupt you while still speaking. But I think that is also part of the problem, is because it is also used for recreational purposes, not just as a detour. We've got them coming around the blind corners, and we've already had residents in accidents already. So there's no signage, there's no prevention, there's grading, but that's it. And more needs to be done, because someone's going to really get badly injured, and then who does that fall on?
Look, Richard Baby's there in the meeting. I guess we can certainly talk with national parks about whether there's opportunity to put some safety signage in if that's required at particular locations. Happy to look at that in more detail if there are particular points.
Richard, do you want to take that?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Thanks for that, Rochelle. I'll make a point of contacting National Parks and Wildlife, and I'll meet a representative on site and see if we can address some of the signage concerns that you have raised. I'd take them on board, and I'd like to provide a response to that in the very near future.
Just so you guys know, someone got stabbed up there the other day, up on Wheelbarrow Ridge track, and it's that isolated up there, and someone actually got stabbed up there. So we can see the issue that we've got going up there. No street lights, no nothing, and these guys are going down that road that has got no street lights, no signage, no nothing. Someone got stabbed.
Thank you. If I can just ask that we keep to the hands for the order. Rochelle, have you got any other comments, or is there anything that?
Yeah, my main concern is actually, sorry to cut you off. My sound's delayed. My main concern is the fire access. We are approaching fire season. Monty, our fire captain, Low Portland, has told us H1s are invited and not told not to come down the bends. We are stranded. When that's blocked off, every resident, if site 1 is blocked off, every resident is then trapped. What do? What are you going to leave us to do? There needs to be a plan. And then this is why we've spoken to Resilience New South Wales about the fire barge. There's access from the water for the waterfront properties. Won't help me on the hill between 2 areas of non-burnt area. The area behind us on the north end has not been backburned for 10 years. So it's a high risk that that's where the fire will come from. I mean, where's the support from council to get our brigades in and do a burn in there to help us? We're in a very vulnerable position. I don't know where to start with it. If our fire brigade is coming from St Albans, we've got a 40-minute delay. Our fire brigade saved our homes in 2019 by 10 minutes before it reached through a grass fire through Green Swamp. You're risking people's lives and their homes. I don't understand why, after a flood disaster, there is no emergency plan. What is the emergency plan and why don't we have one?
So look,
I'm delving into a separate topic there. Jeff, do you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to take up the issue again with the Rural Fire Service in terms of what other options they can do, if that's obviously still a major concern for the community there. As I said, I was up front of saying, yeah, it does take longer to come from the other end, and depending on the size of the vehicle that can get down there, it may be an issue. So happy to take that up further. In terms of the fire barge that you talk about, so the flood fire boat that's based down at Wiseman's Ferry, it's there for a particular reason, I guess, and that's that it's to deal with the number of the properties there. So we have raised that with RFS. So that's not something that is easily relocated and manned at a different location. It requires a whole different set of skills in terms of, it's got to have boatswain and coxswain licenses and so on for staff to operate that. But its primary purpose is located at where it is to protect those properties down there. So it's kind of a little bit like robbing Peter to pay Paul. Well, there's a risk in that. But I'm certainly happy to take it up with the superintendent at RFS and explore what other opportunities that can be put in place. I don't know off the top of my head what that might be in terms of vehicles or being able to provide better access. I'm happy to take that up again with them.
Well, even if council provide us with more water because a H1 truck cannot fit down the bends, or they widen the bends. That's the other option, so that a truck can fit down to rescue homes and people. I mean, or any kind of water access so people can defend themselves is also, because we're not getting heavily available water supply either. There is ways of solving problems and not just looking at them as issues, and moving forward and making a plan to help the people of Greens Road, because at the moment we're still sitting here with nothing.
As I indicated, I'll take that up with the fire superintendent. Look at those options if there are works that we can do to enable better access, and it's feasible without further damaging other sections of the road or affecting other bits. We can look at doing that as well.
And so I don't want to take up anyone else's time, but there is just 2 more points with the Telstra lines. The Telstra poles have been placed in the incorrect position anyway, because we do have the surveying from the 1940s, which haven't been supplied to PSM because the property was purchased by Juniors on Hawkesbury at the time. The property of Juniors of Hawkesbury goes right up to what we refer to as Sandy Beach, which is just before the damage, which you also have as council marked into the hillside. So you know that the road is meant to be 2 lanes road as surveyed. I guess that I'm wondering whether now that the road has to be repaired properly, and you can only do that within emergency funding, but because the Telstra poles have to be moved, will they be moved to the 2-lane survey that the road is meant to sit at, which has never been moved back to as surveys in the 1940s, as on the plan blocks that were approved and are currently for sale by Juniors of Hawkesbury? And also on the surveys for where I sit at Nardu Stud, which was subdivided in the 1980s. So the road is actually surveyed as a 2-lane road, which has never happened. And the Telstra line should be inconsistent with that. So when they move the poles, are they moving it to the 2-lane that it's supposed to be sitting at as surveyed by Hawkesbury Council?
A lot in that question there. I guess what, when you say surveyed as a 2-lane road, we basically, there is a road reserve and a survey width for the road reserve. So the survey simply defines the width of what we call the road reserve, not to do with the formation itself. And as I said, look, there's a lot of historical things that have occurred where things have been done for convenience sake, either through the original construction of the road or Telstra or any other utility that goes there, and just to carry out an expedient and get services in there. What we would be doing if Telstra is in the way of any of the works that we're doing, that's the works that we'd be looking at relocating. If Telstra are encroaching onto private property elsewhere, or elsewhere within the road reserve, there's nothing to require them to relocate. But we would certainly be looking at getting them clear of our works and our formation in those areas where we're going to construct. And that's an area that in the detailed design and the approvals where we would look at the extent of that.
Right, so we've had no Telstra line since November 2019. As the line sits behind Rowan's place down there, it's on the road. And we have, as you guys are aware, it's on the bush lines. I mean, what is if our satellite drops, which is the only way I'm speaking with you now, legally, Telstra has to provide emergency response. We have to be able to contact in an emergency that have a liability to it. So where are we sitting? What state and federal assistance have we asked for to get our Telstra correspondence up as a liability to us? Right, it's telling me I'm unstable.
So just in terms of Telstra, said that something that's exercised a lot of communities' mind, particularly after the fires initially, but even before that with black spots. As I said, and it's I know Stephen Brown's on there, but certainly you drive up to St Albans and you've got cable that's attached to the ground and to the guardrail, and we have, as I said, we've been making representations to Telstra to improve communications. We've actually had some meetings, council core committee meetings and so on, to try and address those issues and have Telstra address it. But again, we're trying to enlist the aid of our federal member, particularly in trying to get Telstra and any of the other telco providers, because they're not the only ones, to try and carry out improvements to that. As I said, it's a separate issue, I guess, but interrelated to the works that we're looking at getting in there now.
Okay, well, thank you. I won't take up anyone else's time. Thanks.
Thanks, Rochelle. Now, before I go back to the Deputy Mayor and Alison, is there anybody else who wants to speak for a first time before I look back there? If not, we might go to you, Alison, before we.
We've
Just
got John Wright putting his hand
Oh,
up.
sorry, John.
Yep.
It's all right, Elizabeth. Just to reiterate, it's good to see that there is some explanation as to where things are up to with the planning, which hasn't been available to the local residents there. There's a lot of concerns besides the road. The road is there's something happening. We'd all like it done tomorrow. We'd all like to, it's great to think that Jeff is considering next week things start on site 2. 2 to 3 weeks there'll be access through to at least juniors and through on site 1. That there's some concerns, and for those that don't know me, is that Rochelle is my daughter, and I'm terribly concerned about whilst we're in COVID and the kids are being educated at home and things like that, is that traditionally, well, in the past, they meet their school bus to go to Ebenezer School at juniors. Now, over the last 4 months, is that 5 months, Rochelle's had to go via the fire trail, and if she doesn't connect with the bus, which is located on Wheelbarrow Ridge Road, she then has to drive another 22 kilometres onto Wilberforce, go back home, go and pick the kids up again. So it's a big exercise, and I'm sure that you're all aware of that. There's been that much correspondence sent by myself and Rochelle that, you know, it is a serious thing. The water service should not be an issue with Resilience New South Wales to implement. You've got a road that's been damaged by major flood, and there has got to be ways and means around it. It's the same with the emergency services. I spoke to the the manager or rural fire service. It might have been actually marine services at Wiseman's Ferry, and it was suggested by them that the barge for RFS be relocated to Lower Portland, so that in the case of an emergency, that it could be transported around. Now, if he's saying, hey, there's an issue, and Jeff's just said a while ago, it's located in Wiseman's Ferry to service certain properties up that way. Well, tomorrow, Jeff, just ask Resilience New South Wales to find another barge. There are other barges available through RFS and through Marine Services, so just ask for another one. As far as the water taxi is concerned, to get my grandchildren from the northern side to pick up the bus in Wheelbarrow Road by the mighty Hawkesbury River will be about 4 minutes. So that should be just implemented. Now, that's just their circumstances, but there are others there that need to get to work. There's a variety of reasons why a water taxi, a water service provided by New South Wales Resilience should have been implemented months ago. It's been recommended up to council. It's been all sent up, but nothing happens. And now we're being told that, oh, we've still got a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. I'm sure the Commissioner of Resilience New South Wales would be astounded by if he was to know that he cannot provide an alternative under the circumstances created by the disaster flood on Greens Road back in March 2020. So my recommendations are is that, Jeff, if you're talking to Resilience New South Wales, is get the water service for all those. You're going to be closed. It could be used during closure. People out there in Lower Portland can work things. Their vehicles can be relocated during those temporary weeks so that they can pick up, rather than use a fire trail, which is a fire trail. It is unsafe for public access. And council and Resilience New South Wales have got to take the necessary action to any alternative that's going to look after the residents of that area. Both sides, in the middle, doesn't matter. There's also other people that are affected well beyond the high side of and the low side, as well, the south and well, we got the southern side we've got the northern side. But these things can be resolved if the council and others, government departments, will listen to the local residents' their requirements. They're not asking for any favours. It's costing them a financial bomb, every one of them out there at the moment, for a section of road, 200 metres in one section now, probably 400 to 500 in another section, which in other LGAs, which I am not in that LGA, have completed kilometres of washed out of road since March when the floods were in various areas. So it's just a matter of things that got to happen. We're nearly there. I can hear what you're saying, but we're nearly across the line about the starting next week and doing the temporary access, and there's all these little things, but things have got to happen. A decision's got to be made, and we get on with it. I thank you for your time, and I just hope that we're going to see very, very quickly over the next few days, few weeks, that things are really going to happen. Thank you.
I'll just indicate just a quick response to each of those. So yeah, as I said, we're happy to talk with RFS again and see whether there are other measures that can be taken. Certainly raise the issue of water-based access again with Resilience tomorrow. And yep, this is, and the last point you've made there, yep, this council has carried out extensive works and repairs on other roads. So it's not a question of our will and capacity to be able to do that. It's simply that this one here is incredibly difficult to resolve. Landslip failures are very, very challenging. Hills Council had numerous issues in the previous floods with damage on the river road. And again, we talked earlier, things, talked about the Seacliff Bridge down the south coast. It was certainly a major reconstruction. It's not something that's easily, or even Hawkesbury Road that was also referred to, that was out of action for the best part of 2 years, I think. So again, these are difficult engineering solutions in those sorts of environments. So it's not a question of will or capacity, it's just simply difficulty.
Thanks, Jeff, for that. I do appreciate your comments, but as I said before, it's we can't compare apples to apples all the time, but it'd be nice to think that we can get on with it. It's nearly there, but in the meantime, while other things are happening, there are personal lives that have got to be considered, particularly with movement in and out, encouraging the fight. All these things have got to be taken into consideration, and perhaps that it's all under control, but to me, it just doesn't sound like it's totally under control at the moment.
Thanks, John. Appreciate your thoughts.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you for that.
Any further comments before I go back to Alison and the Deputy Mayor? Scanning. Joe Goldsworthy.
Hey, yep. Hi. I'm one of the residents that is in the middle section. So obviously fire is a concern, but also ambulance access. We've got elderly neighbours that aren't on the call tonight. There's kids, we're all here. So if we've had incidents where a helicopter will land at Juniors, but then we've had other incidents where weather has prevented a helicopter being able to land and an ambulance has been sent. So I understand this is already an issue for the northern residents, but if the road was closed overnight or whatever during the time the work is carried out, then I just want to raise ambulance and other emergency services other than fire obviously would be a concern to hear with us if we've got absolutely no access at all.
So I think that's probably why I've indicated I don't think that's the favoured option to carry out those interim works.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Joe. Any further questions, Joe, before I move on to Larissa?
When you say the interim works, does that mean I'm still failing to understand whether we're going to have access for the whole duration of works? I don't understand the different options that you're giving us. I go to work at all different hours from early in the morning to late at night. I don't want to be restricted, and I can't be restricted. So does that mean I have to then relocate where I live? And then if I do have to do that, who's going to pay for that?
So the interim works I was just referring to were those at Site 1, south of South Juniors, where, as I said, during the if we were to do the interim works at that location, then that area would be further, anything but between the two closures would be, there would be no access at night time. So I'm not recommending the interim works be done at Site 1, other than potentially looking at some of the things that were talked about in terms of widening and or works that might enable us to increase the load limit or vehicle manoeuvrability through there.
But limiting that that access to daylight hours, it's just not an option in my view. And I'm sure that it's echoed by everybody else on the call or on the meeting. Sorry.
So again, the issue there is one of safety, and as I said, if we're putting traffic back across these interim works without all of the engineered works that Gareth has put forward, as I said, that's the area where we need to be monitoring and managing that. And as I said, that's the risks that we need to weigh up if we were to consider opening the interim works at Site 2 at night time. I'm not sure how we would actually do that and maintain that safety, but I'm happy to take that up with PFSM.
Yeah. And this is, I guess, the quid pro quo that we're having to balance here in terms of trying to obtain access for residents whilst maintaining safety. And at this stage, the advice from PFSM is that they would only be supportive of those interarrangements if those restrictions were in place. So this is the balance we're trying to juggle, I guess.
Okay.
Larissa? Larissa Turner?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Gotcha.
I'm next door to Joe and Bryce that just spoke. I think a lot of things have been raised, and a lot of things have been raised. I guess I don't want it to take another 5 months for all those things to be addressed. I guess I've got 4 questions, so if you want to take note of them. How will council come back to, I guess, this group on all those items raised? And how quickly will they come back? Who makes a decision from here on? Do you want anything back from us on what our preferred options are? Who will make the final decision on what the option is going to be? When will council make that decision? I think we need a time frame. We need you to let us know when that decision is going to be made. And when the decision's made, when will we get a finalised program?
Okay, all good questions. Jeff, you want to take that?
Yeah, so probably, as I said, without taking a straw poll tonight, but I haven't heard, I think we've probably explained, as I said, the preferred option is not to carry out interim works, other than potentially if we can do some minor improvements at Site 1. I think, I'm thinking the question through how we best communicate that. I think probably the thing would be, as everybody's emails, we've got all the contacts here, the people on this group, but Suzanne can probably put this through, and we can just put that up and say, this is our preferred option, and give a fairly quick turnaround time so that we can actually start moving on making decisions. As I said, it's always this balance between going out and consulting and taking every person's view into account and weighing them up and so on. But I think I've got to, from the engineering discipline, to say, look, this is the preferred option, and that's what we're intending to proceed with, and put that out there as I guess a notification, and give a week or so for people to come back with any deal breaker issues that might change our mind. I think sometimes you've got to be sort of a little bit of the benevolent dictator to get things moving. Otherwise, we will be sitting around here thinking about, well, what could we have done 6 months ago.
As we've indicated, we're all but ready to commence out at those interim works out at site 2.
Okay, so when will we know? When will we get a definitive decision? Because tonight Jeff's still thinking, he's not sure, this is what you want to go with. When will we have a decision?
So I think the answer is that subject, just doing the construction planning now, that last little phase is our intention to carry out the interim or temporary works at site 2 commencing next week. That doesn't impact on anybody other than the current impact that's there. The road is closed, and that's and that would take us 3 to 4 weeks. In terms then of the option whether to not carry out interim works at site 1, that's what I'm just talking about. We can put that out and just get some feedback in the next week on the proposal not to undertake that. So I'm flying that kite right now, saying that's our proposal. And as I said, we give that a week and see if there's any, I'll call it the deal breakers or something that nobody's thought about. Always happy to change my mind if the circumstances change. But that would be the proposal. I'm happy to put that out there on to everybody tomorrow in terms of clearly enunciating that, and then put it on for broader comment from the community for those people who aren't here, may have an interest in it.
Okay, so it's the 26th of August tonight. So you're saying by the 2nd of September, you will have that will be all issued and out, and you want feedback from everyone by the 2nd of September, and you're going to start the work the following week? Or when are you proposing to start the work?
No, we'd be looking at starting works at site 2 next week, weather and all other conditions and things being equal. So that's our intention, is to start those works. So it's not dependent on anything or any further consultation. What would be, and that would give us, if we got feedback within the week from the time that we go out and get it out to the community tomorrow. So next Friday or the following Monday after that, whatever that date is. We've still got a little bit of time to play with, because we would never do the 2 works concurrently. Yeah. So, but that would then give us the direction that we'll make that decision and confirm that.
Does that make sense? We're pushing on with site 2.
Yep.
And we're going to start there. We're going to start there next week. What we're asking for input in is about site 1 and whether we undertake interim works at site 1.
Okay. Thank you.
Were they your 4 questions, Larissa? You've gone back on mute, so I'm going to take that was the case. Stephen Brown.
Thanks, Liz. Look, just an outsider's perspective, and I say outsider, someone from McDonald Valley. Tonight's been really important for the most impacted people, and that is the direct residents there along Greens Road. But just, to paint a picture, Liz, for you, because you're new GM, for Robin, because the community expects it of your participation, but that wider perspective, things like, what is the the council's view of traffic management planning with the bridge to bridge ski boat race, which typically closes ferries. So when Greens Road, Bicentenary Road are used as through traffic routes when the ferries are off for the wider community. Are you tracking and are you aware of the economic impact for the wider community? When you hear people in our community saying they can't get deliveries or it's costly for them to get deliveries because the road is closed. I was out in the fire truck the other day heading off to North Turnbull HR, and we had a discussion in the truck. We're not going that way. We're not going up Wheelbarrow Ridge track. It's we can't get through there with the Cat 1 truck. We're going to go over two ferries, or during the 2019-2020 fires, in and out of fire control under lights through Greens Road, Bicentenary Road. We had all sorts of vehicles going through there. I say it, I know there's not answers, but just be aware, Liz and others, of the wider impacts and perspective of this. It's vitally important for those direct residents. but it's also has an impact on the wider community because that is both a commuter, you know, people do drive through there, and tourists as well. So for business and for residents. So I don't expect answers, and just make a statement on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate your input. Okay. Alison?
No, I'm almost hesitant to raise this because, you know, I feel like you're going to throw something at me, but, you know, I did hear Rochelle say 2 lanes. And yet the plan I saw really only constructs 1 lane, correct? So we're really just replacing what we already had and not making any provision for the subdivisions that are occurring along Greens Road and beyond. Is that correct?
I think what the cross section that was put up by Gareth indicated the interim work. So it was showing a single vehicle there, really in some of those cross sections just for scale. But in the interim works at site 2, it would be single lane under traffic control for that while those interim works are there. The overall width of the formation that we'd be putting back would be between 5.5 and 6.5, which is 2-lane traffic at those locations.
Yay! That's all I've got to say. Thank you so much for your contributions tonight. I thought everybody was great.
No problems. Oh, Mary's gone blank. So, Rochelle, Stephen, sorry, Mary, I missed you earlier. Did you want to provide a comment?
I was just originally going to say that Stephen Brown had put a comment in the comments section when people were talking about the fire trucks getting there. And of course, he was referring to the fire trucks coming from the McDonald Valley end. But I did just have a question around the interim measures. Is the main impediment to that funding or logistics? Because both were mentioned, but what is the real thing that's stopping getting something in place? Because obviously this is progressing, but there's still going to be a period of time that John raised, you know, what I was going to raise about how much quicker it would be for people to be able to access things via the water. Is that simply a funding or logistics or both?
So just in terms of you're only referring to the water access issue?
Yes.
I think the logistics issue can be potentially resolved fairly quickly. As I said, you know, indication that communities are prepared to work together and provide some access there. As I said, yeah, we have been working for some time at getting the quotations. They've been a little bit long from 2 firms. We didn't just simply go to Osmotherly. And then, as I said, in terms of the funding, that's something I said we just need to take up. It's something could be put in place. From our discussions with Darren Osmotherly, in a few weeks is the time frame and the lead time required. There's probably some little logistics issues in terms of both his work and, you know, a safe landing point. And I've been putting that back to him as a contractor if he was the selected person to do that. And then, as I said, we just need to resolve and put those, I guess, the current issue in terms of what we understand in terms of times of closure and all of the other impacts back to Resilience New South Wales and get their view as to whether that's something that can be funded either under the natural disaster funding arrangements. As I said, our initial advice was that is not something that would have been eligible under those. There's fairly strict guidelines for that, or whether there's alternate funding available through Resilience New South Wales through some other means. So that's what we need to look at.
Do their funding guidelines even envisage a situation like this where people are completely isolated in this sense for so long? Or are they more to do with like immediate recovery sorts of and repairs? Because this would seem a fairly unique situation, I would think. Maybe it's more common than we know. But just from what I'm hearing, the vulnerability that people are feeling and the complexity of getting the road fixed, I think just if they had some knowledge of being able to get some access to know that in an emergency situation they could get out would be really good to pursue. So hopefully, you know, Robin's here, she might have some clues of how that funding could come about, but that would be really good if that yeah, if that could be prioritised, I guess.
So I'm not trying to over-egg it, but there's, as I said, with natural disaster funding, there's three phases of that. So there's that immediate works when we just get out there during the and fill the holes in the road and do whatever you've got to do and pick up the trees and so on. So that's that initial phase. There's another phase there about the restoration of those assets and bringing them back to functioning. And then there's the third category, which is, they call it the EPA, the essential public asset restoration part of it. And that's what this one's fitting into. Provision of alternate access doesn't neatly fit into any of those categories, and that's probably the reason. I said we're dealing with a piece of a legislative arrangement between the state and the Commonwealth that both parties have got to agree to get that funding. Having said that, there may be opportunities for other buckets of money, I'll call it, other funding sources to be able to do that outside of those arrangements.
It's quite possible it could be needed again in the future somewhere along the river too. So I guess it'd be something good to know, how we could access that if it happens again. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Mary. Now, Rochelle, your hand's up, but I think that's a legacy hand, so I won't go back to you.
Yes,
it is.
Sorry. Thanks, Elizabeth. Sorry, my noise is delayed. Sorry, Lower Portland issues. I'm fine. I've covered everything. It's still hanging around there, the hand. And I just want to thank you all again for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Oh, Liz, you want to chime in?
Sorry, I would be remiss, Liz, to not chime in with my community services hat on. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Liz. I come at the other end of the flood recovery updates that come out fairly regularly. There's just been lots of talk, I know, of anxiety, particularly around your kids, and worry and stress, and it's financially, appreciate that it's really difficult. I'm going to stick the link in the chat to the flood information page. You're probably so over hearing about it, but there are a couple of new recovery support services that are started now. They've got case managers, they've got mental health professionals, they've got wellbeing people. There's a particularly good worker that can work with children and art therapy. So she's happy to work over Zoom, happy for you to ring me, have a chat, and we will connect you. But yeah, I just would be remiss I can't fix your road and I can't fix a lot of things, but happy to have a chat and to try and point you in the right direction if I can. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thanks, Liz. Robin, did you want to say a few words? Had a question?
Thanks, everyone. You can hear me? Just in relation to what I'm hearing and how far you can take this in repairs and remediation of the sites. With Site 1, Jeff, you talked about the reinforced earth, the hybrid version of what you're proposing. Is there an opportunity, because I'm hearing from a lot of the locals, and Rowan's one of them that spoke about it tonight, in being able to widen that road away from the riverbank and provide that stability by cutting into the area more, so that you're coming at it from both ways. So you've got the excavation into the slope and also the reinforced earth, and trying that as a double whammy of a strategy there. I just think, going forward with further floods, you're going to get further erosion and then compacting again. Now, I'm not an engineer, but when I went out there, Rowan's suggestion was a very obvious choice. If you've got cooperation from the owner and there is opportunity to reinforce that, and you've got funding from state government as well, I'd be going for broke on this. Talk to the residents, see what they think. But what I'm hearing is maybe a double approach on that. Is that something that council has looked at? And I'd really like, the other thing is for us to come back and have another meeting in about a week's time, and you come back and update people on the things that we've talked about tonight, so that we can get some movement forward and some answers.
Probably take the last part of that. I think, it's something we can certainly have a look at, how we get back and communicate. As if we're going to go out there and seek that advice from one, the community, but two, whatever else we can discuss with RFS and or resilience, and in terms of the other options that have been put forward, there might be a good way to come back to close that loop off, as with the people that are here tonight.
I just think we owe that to everyone here tonight. It's great that we're all together putting our ideas in, but I think they need then to have council come back, and myself, I want to hear on going forward what's decided, rather than them find out on the grapevine down the track. This is a great initiative. Let's keep this going, I'm suggesting.
Yep, look, I'm happy to do that. I'm looking at Suzanne and the GM there. But,
we've got the Upper Colo. Sorry, I was interrupted. We've just got the Upper Colo Bridge next week. So
whenever you can, but revisit this and continue this discussion, just so we bring people on the journey with this.
That's the worry.
It doesn't have to be the same time.
Yeah, it's a good way to make sure everybody's getting the same story. There's, I said, there's always Chinese whispers in all sorts of, and how things go along, and the story gets changed. So I think it's good that we can everybody hears the same thing at the same time, and you can get that inflection on the tone and the answer to the questions that can come only via Zoom.
And look, what I've thrown in there is maybe doubling the budget on this, but we need to have a conversation after this meeting as to how we would achieve that.
Yeah. And then, as I said, in terms of I did get a message from staff on this. So that access road would require the alternate. I think at site 1 would require quite substantial work to make it accessible if that was to be the alternate. In terms of that balance between cutting into the embankment, because it's probably an exponential cost issue where you start cutting into that, and engineering issue, and so that's the balance we've got to strike as to what's the best way to do it. And our intent with this is to get some longevity out of this structure. So again, if we can do it sort of economically, I'd also balance that with the longevity of that, because as I said, both of these sites, and even between the two, it's on the outside bend of the river, and we're going to get those riverine changes in whatever era that we have. Just interesting, we've taken a short snapshot of in geological history and put a road adjacent to a riverbank, and it's been flooded 19 times and probably relocated in many locations twice or 3 times. Something says when something's not working, you do something different. So again, this is the opportunity, and the funding is generous in terms of being able to get that better solution. In terms of I call it betterment, but building to today's standard.
Well, there's no better time to do that when the funding's on the table. Let's get it done the right way rather than a piecemeal job. That's what I'm saying.
Yep, absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. All right, there's no further comments. Just looking across the screen, no?
I can't put my hand up, sorry, Liz.
Go for it, Damian.
I know I'm jumping the gun here a little bit further on, but obviously the road was flagged to be sealed as well. So are we, obviously implementing the right engineering and structure to allow that to happen? Is that still on the cards to happen once this is all rectified?
So the sealing that Damian's talking about is the sealing up to the South Juniors from the existing seal. So council's allocated funding. And for obvious reasons, that's been not progressed at the moment. The funding remains available for that, and we would still up to South Juniors is still the intent to seal that. There was a question earlier about drainage and so on, and again, it may be that we need to look at short lengths, depending on the nature of the work, of further sealing to protect the pavement from water ingress. So there may be some other options there, or need to do a higher standard to protect the Garris engineering solutions. So that's something we can look at as part of that, see whether that can be, or if it's an inherent part of the design. But certainly it's the intent to still continue with the sealing. ultimately up to juniors with that funding that council had allocated.
That'd be great. Just one other thing too is obviously well, I don't know who was out today, but I saw it later this afternoon. The drains were cleared and all the drainage was working again. But on Tuesday we had the rain there. The guys that had drilled the holes there had left all their sediment there, which had fallen into the drains, and thankfully it got around that and into the causeways that it needed to get to. But it's been rectified today. But it was potentially it could have been a lot worse if the drainage wasn't adequate. Considering the fact that it was blocked off, and it could have caused considerable damage to that area there if it was water's obviously the biggest issue there at the moment. So I think it's we need to make sure that the site is maintained really, really well, not after the fact, but before the fact. That's all.
Yeah, I did notice that there were also some minor landslips that occurred during the rain event as well. So some fresh ones that ended up in the table drain. So again, that gives some further weight to Gareth's view that we've got an unstable slope upstream of that, albeit they're only small failures that were coming down, but they do have that capacity to block table drains and cause significant further damage. And we're consciously aware of that. We do inspect the road on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, I know it's being inspected really. I know Richard's there fairly often and that too, but obviously those drillings were done, probably 6 or 7 or 8 weeks ago, and they were still blocking the drainways. So.
Thanks, Damien. Rochelle?
Yeah, sorry guys to jump in again. It's not in relation to the immediate problems with the road. It's just a little bit frustrating as a resident on Greens Road that Greens Road is considered to juniors on Hawkesbury. There's actually a lot more residents past juniors on Hawkesbury, and I would like Hawkesbury City Council to strongly start considering Greens Road as a whole with all its services. And I'm going off, the point of this meeting a little bit, but we are reconstructing a road to standard as well presented by PFSM to a required standard, a structural standard. And with that, all Greens Road residents should be able to receive emergency assistance, fire assistance, water haulage, garbage assistance, which I know that Patrick's really aware. I keep bringing up with him. Every road in the Hawkesbury City Council should have Australia Post, fire assistance, and waste removal. We're not getting waste removal past juniors, and the residents that sit there in front of juniors, they have a tight access as well. So it's great that we're getting paved and sealed to juniors on Hawkesbury, but there's actually a long length of road past juniors, which is also good road, and there is a lot more permanent residents past that point. And seems I have you all here with me. I would really like you all to also consider that in your future plans, that the reconstruction of this road also has to take the garbage trucks and Australia Post and any other services that we need, whether it be the fire trucks. And it's great that's being done in that section, but it is a whole road and it is a Hawkesbury City Council road. Anyway, thank you guys for letting me put that across.
No worries. Thanks, Rochelle. Appreciate that. Okay, everybody. Well, I think that might draw us to a close for this evening. So I've certainly taken quite a few notes around some key action points. I suspect you'll obviously continue to get our weekly updates. We'll look to organise another catch-up to close the loop on some of these matters like the water-based access. After discussions with resilience, we've got some discussions with RFS to be had about fire. Richard's going to go and talk to national parks about the fire trail and seeing what improvements we might be able to make there in terms of signage to deal with safety temporarily. And otherwise, as I said, Jeff seems to think that in all likelihood, weather permitting, we'll start to be out at site 2 next week. As indicated, and with all the caveats in the world that Jeff makes me put on things, we're looking at about 3 to 4 weeks out there, Jeff, and until we can start to get some temporary access restored at site 2. So fully acknowledge and appreciate the frustrations and the challenges that each of you have been living under for the last 5 months. And thank you for your patience and continuing to work with us. But I do feel like we're starting to get traction. So we'll be back in touch shortly to start to set up perhaps a second meeting. And otherwise, thank you all very much for your participation. I certainly appreciate it, and I wish you good evening.